Hello and welcome to another Make a Code Monday video. My name is Max. I'm a programmer at the Innisfil Idea Lab and Library. And today I would love to share with you this kind of really simple platforming game. It's a game where you are a cat who loves to jump around, collect keys, and then, make your way to the end goal. This is what the game looks like here, and we'll make something just like this in our tutorial. All right, let's get started. So here I'm already in the middle of a new project at the website arcade.makecode.com. Arcade.makecode.com is a great way to make games, and it's a block-based code editor. And so what we need to do is make our character, make our scene, make some enemies, make a key, make a goal, and then that should be a complete game for us to play. First things first, I like to start with our character. So under the sprites drawer, you can pull up a set my sprite to sprite blank of kind player. That's a perfectly reasonable place to start. Your my sprite character needs an image, so we click that gray square. You can always draw a character, but for speed's sake right now, I'm going to pick one from the gallery. And I really like for this game the cat. So we have a little kind of cat friend here, a little cat pal, and we say done there. And so now we have a perfect character in the middle of an all black void. Next thing would be to create our scene, and we're going to do this in an interesting way using a tile map. So under the scene drawer, we're going to scroll down and set tile map to blank. The tile map is an easy way to create a complex scene using repeated tile graphics. And so if we click the blank gray square here, it brings us to the tile map editor. The tile map editor has different sort of sections in their gallery. For this game, I found some miscellaneous tiles. We have this kind of brick wall here. I should say that the tile map starts out at 16 by 16 tiles, and each tile is a 16 by 16 pixel image. And so to make something a little larger, let's actually increase this number here to 24 by 24. That way it takes up more than one screen width, and you have to kind of really work your way around to get to the goal. So I've selected my brick tile, and instead of drawing freehand, which I'm not the best at, we can just start with a rectangle here, a rectangle tool. And I'm going to make our border so we cannot escape this kind of puzzle platformer area. And then I can use the line tool to make our platforms. And so if you're pretty serious about making a game that you want to kind of show off, you're probably going to maybe plan this out a little better with, say, maybe some grid paper first, making all your sort of level design choices that way, and then realizing that in the game later. I'm just being quick here. I'm just dragging some of what I hope are reasonably spaced and sized platforms. We will shortly find out. But for now, I think this is an okay approach. And then make a little area where the goal will be up here, perhaps. Okay. So while we're in the tile map editor, I'm just going to finish everything off that I want to do here. So we have our bricks in place, but just because they look like bricks, it does not mean they are see-through. We need to add the walls in separately. And so this little kind of square block shape here is the Draw Walls tool. And it's kind of interesting. We can actually use the Draw Walls tool with the paint bucket, and we can just say, click on any individual brick, and it'll automatically make a wall any brick that's attached to it. And so we can do that to really speed up our wall drawing. The next thing we want to add are some sort of like portals for enemies to jump out of. And so again, in the miscellaneous category, I think this kind of open cavity is pretty good. We can use this as a way to just draw on some individual bad guy portals here and there. I'm just going to space them out kind of evenly around the map. Maybe put one over here, and that should be good. Lastly, in the dungeon category of the gallery, I'm just going to look for a locked door. I want to find a door that'll signal to the player that this is kind of the end, and they need to go through this door to eventually win. And so this locked door is perfect, and then that'll be what our player wants to get to in order to win the game. So we have everything in our tile map. I'm going to press done, and we can see our changes will load there in the editor. And of course, it's still kind of a static black background. Our cat's kind of floating in midair. There are some things we need to change, to say the least. First thing, wouldn't it be nice if our cat wasn't in kind of a semi-random position? We should probably pick where that is. Well, under the scene drawer, we can place a sprite directly on a particular tile. And so place my sprite on top of tile, column, and row. By referring to the tile map, we can see the tile locations in the bottom left-hand corner here. So this individual block right here is column 9, row 22, and that sounds perfect for me. So column 9, row 22. That position is far off our screen, and so in order to put our sprite in the right spot, we are going to want to set the camera to follow our character. There we go. So the cat disappeared. Tile map at the top. Perfect. Cat disappeared, which is perfect because we need to go to the scene drawer and have camera follow my sprite. We can make our sprite move around also, and so if I move sprite with buttons, that'll make it so that our cat for sure can fly around the screen. Again, not super ideal because this is a platformer, not a fly former, and so we want the cat to have some sense of gravity. To do that, we're going to use the sprite drawer once again, find our set my sprite x2 block, and put that in there. The x is a specific coordinate. What we want actually is the acceleration in the y direction. So y coordinates go up and down, and acceleration y can be used to apply some gravity. If I say that our character wants to be forced to the ground by their acceleration, that means this number has to be a positive value. So the acceleration will force our character to be stationary. Our character can still fly around basically, and so to remedy that, under the move my sprite with buttons, we're going to say they can move in the x direction, maybe at 80 pixels per second, but I can't just force them in the y direction. Instead, to move in the y direction, the player will have to press the A button to propel themselves upward in a jumping motion, perhaps. In order to do this, we can once again go to the sprites drawer, and we're going to change that sprite's velocity in the y direction. And so Vy, to quickly apply a fast jump, we're going to change their y velocity, which will of course be soon impacted by their constant acceleration downward. So maybe they jump up at 140 pixels per second. Let's take a look at how that feels. Oh yes, and of course it needs to be a negative number, and that'll push us upwards towards the screen. The origin point is 0, 0, so numbers get smaller as they go up and bigger as they go down. So now negative 140 will mean that our player jumps. Kind of a bit of a floaty jump, so we can always make that velocity a little less. Also, you may notice that your character, can jump all they want. If I keep on pressing the jump button, they jump and jump and jump, which kind of, again, goes counter to this idea of it being a platformer. So in order to make that work a little more seamlessly, I'm going to make the gravity a little stronger, make the jump a little more, but also to apply the jump only when you can jump, we're going to use some logic. So we're going to say if something is true, only then can we change their velocity. And the thing we want to know is true is whether or not we are actually on the ground. In make code, we can do this pretty easily. We can say, or we can ask the question, is my sprite hitting a wall below me on the bottom? So if that my sprite is hitting a wall beneath them, that probably means their feet are on the ground, which then means we can jump only then. So if I jump now, I can't just jump wildly in the air. I can only jump if my feet are on the ground, which I think makes a good amount of sense. So we have a jumping character. In terms of our platformer, this is basically all we need to make it a workable platformer, in the sense that, we have a character that moves and jumps around the screen. But to make it a little more exciting, we can add some visual flair, number one, and also some elements of risk and reward. And to start small, the visual flair I have in mind is pretty simple. Under the scene drawer, we can set a background color. And so instead of a black void, we can have a, let's say, dark purple void. And that just already kind of gives the game a little bit more of a visual character. In terms of the reward, well, we have a locked door way up at the top of our scene. Let's now also make it possible to open that door with a key. The key will be a sprite that we can pick up, and that will take with us to the door to unlock it to win the game. To make that sprite, we'll open up the sprites drawer and say set my sprite 2 to sprite blank of kind player. This is where things already start to get a little weird. There's my sprite and my sprite 2. I think the best thing to do as soon as you have more than one character in a game is take that first variable you created, because the sprites themselves live inside a variable, and rename it something logical. So if this is a kitty cat flying around, then my character's name is now Kitty. And the rename variable function applies itself to all instances of the variable, which is very handy, does that on its own. So Kitty is now Kitty, which is great. And my sprite 2, we're going to just make a brand new variable, and we're going to call this one the door key. And click on that gray box. I'm pretty sure in the gallery there's no key graphic, so we'll just make our own. I'm going to pick a kind of yellow, use the circle tool, and then the line tool again. Make it kind of key-like. Make that a little more like a key. Great. Perfectly functional as a key, let's say. And then, of course, it starts off in the center of the original coordinates, and which is way in the top left corner of our map. To set it specifically, we'll use another one of these place sprite on top of tile map blocks. I'm just going to duplicate this one, change the name to door key, and look at our tile map and say, maybe just a little up here. Just a little up and to the right. So 1319. 1319, not bad. I'm just going to playing the game for a moment. I realize some of these walls are pretty tight, so we'll kind of tidy that up a little bit. And there we go. Not too bad. Okay, and so 1319 done, and that's where we'll make this show up. The door key is there, and it's not too bad. You can send me some comments on how bad that looks as a sprite for a key, but still, there it is. There's a door key. And the one thing you notice is that nothing happens when we run into it just yet. So that, is a problem. To make the key kind of be picked up by the player, under the sprites drawer, we're going to find the sprite overlaps. And so, right over here, on sprite of kind player overlaps other sprite of kind player. That's just what we want. We're going to use this block to detect when your player, the sprite, overlaps another sprite, and then the action we commit to there will only run in that instance, which is perfect. The one thing that you might find we need to change is that, it doesn't make a lot of sense to call the key a player because no one controls the key. So let's just add a new kind and call that key, kind of key. So here we can say on sprite of kind player overlaps other sprite of kind key. And just like our variable names, we can use the kind titles to help us provide kind of a logical framework to the game that we can understand just by kind of scanning the code, and we get a sense of what's meant to happen because all of our names line up in a very positive way. What should happen though when this block is triggered? Well, I think it's kind of fun if we use the sprites block to have one follow the other. And so set my enemy to follow my sprite. That's basically what we want, except we want the other sprite, which is the key, to follow your sprite, which is you. The fastest your sprite can probably move is 140 pixels per second. And so that's what we should make the speed that the key follows you, just so it follows you nice and tightly when you pick it up. And of course, we'll test that out before we go too much further. You pick up the key, and it's attached to you, more or less. Kind of dragging it on the ground. That's not bad. Great. And so, of course, the danger element now is, well, what if there was something that can knock that key out of your hand? Wouldn't that be distressing? And so we're going to add some enemies. In the onStart block, we're going to do something, I think, a little interesting. We'll find out. Using the loops drawer, we're going to repeat an action a bunch of times. So maybe 10 times. And what we're going to repeat is the creation of some bad guys. Under the sprites drawer, we can set my sprite of kind player in there, and it'll generate a sprite over and over again, as many times as we specify. And so instead of my sprite, let's call this one snake, because it's going to be a snake. The little gray box here to open up the gallery. There's a very scary looking snake, which works out just fine for us. So we say done. And this is very easy. There's already an enemy, kind, so perfect. So set snake to sprite, snake of kind enemy. We're going to do something very particular here. We want the snake to show up in kind of our bad guy portals that we set up in the tile map. And we want the snakes to come from there, with a certain speed. Under the scene drawer, we can find a block to help us out with this. And so we can say, place my sprite on top of random blank tile. And so that's great. So we're going to take that snake that we just kind of generated, put it on top of a random enemy spawn point, let's say. And then we are going to make it so that the enemies are a little scarier. We're going to make them move on their own. So under the sprites drawer, we're just going to set my sprite X to something, except of course, we're setting our snake. And instead of the X, which is just a coordinate, we're going to set their velocity X to have a value. That'll make them move left or right. A positive number will make them automatically move to the right. And lastly, so there's our snakes moving to the right. And you can tell it's kind of weird, right? Just a floating, scrolling snake. So to kind of complete the look, we're going to just duplicate this acceleration block. Change that to snake. So the snake will have the same downward acceleration that your player does, some same type of gravity. Boom. There we go. But again, just to make it yet more terrifying, we are going to, under the sprite drawer, look for a flag. So under the effects section, set my sprite stain screen as off. Well, all that needs to change. It's going to be the snake we're interested in. We're going to say bounce on wall, and we're definitely going to say on. This way, the snake finds a way to kind of move around the screen. And so it's something that you really need to find a way to avoid, which is very, very terrifying. And so to finish it off, or at least this part off, we know that the player, when they overlap the key, they pick up the key. So we're going to duplicate that. And instead of the first sprite being the kind of player, we'll say that's an enemy. And so the sprite bubble here is just a placeholder. It'll hold any sprite which meets this condition of having this kind, and same with the player. And so we don't need to change this code because now this sprite refers to any sprite of kind enemy, whereas this sprite refers to any sprite of kind player. We are going to make the key follow the snake a little looser to kind of make it a little easier to kind of snatch it back from them, maybe 90 instead of 140, the speed that the key follows them. Or actually, since we know that the character only moves at about 50 pixels per second, we'll just make that at like 45. Something like that. We can always change it. And then this seems like a lot of snakes flying around. Maybe we'll just say 8 snakes. Lastly, there's no way to win the game yet. That's a bit of a problem. And so we have a key, which is great. We have our player, which can move the key, and the point is to move it into the locked door tile. So under the scene drawer, we are going to find a block to check that out. So on sprite of kind player overlaps at tile at location. Well, good enough for me. Bring that out there in kind of our overlap stack. So when the key kind overlaps the locked door, pretty simple in our case, we're just going to use the game drawer to say game over, win. So not too bad. I'll zoom out kind of one tick. We can just see all the code at once. Yeah, looks like a pretty good game. Of course, we'll find out by playing it. Let's see if we can get to the goal. Pick up my key. Try to avoid the snakes. Let's see what happens if the snake grabs the key. Oh yeah, just to test it out. Perfect. So the snake stole the key, and I stole it back. Okay, so let's get out of here. Whoopsie. We made it to the end. Whew. That was a close one. That's all I was hoping to show you on this edition of Make a Code Monday. I hope that you do your best to make the best version of this kind of simple platformer. And then hopefully see you on the next one. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.